Welcome back to our channel. Wheat pennies big bucks? Yep. These 5 prove it. You won't believe. Smash that like and hit subscribe. In the spring of 1941, the United States found itself standing on the edge of global conflict, watching war unfold in Europe while cautiously clinging to neutrality. On the home front, Americans carried on, unaware that before the year was out, everything would change. Amid this backdrop of uncertainty and tension, the U.S. Mint in Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco continued to perform one of its most essential duties, producing currency for a nation unaware of what was to come. One of the most common coins produced that year was the 1-cent piece, the Lincoln Wheat Penny, a fixture of American pockets and purses since its debut in 1909. Millions of 1941 wheat pennies poured out of the presses, each bearing the familiar image of President Lincoln on the obverse and the classic wheat stalks on the reverse. They were designed to be used, not cherished, passed between hands for bread, newspapers, or bus fare. But somewhere within that massive production run, a subtle but defining flaw slipped through, hidden among the crowd. A flaw that wouldn't be spotted for decades, buried in the everyday change of an era now gone. It was nearly 60 years later when the story took an unexpected turn. A retired machinist named Curtis, living in a quiet corner of Ohio, spent his free time exploring estate sales and flea markets in search of overlooked relics. Coins had become his quiet obsession. One cloudy afternoon, he found himself browsing through an old tackle box at a neighborhood garage sale. The box was filled with worn coins, most no longer of any significant value. But one coin, coppery, darkened with age, marked with a simple 1941, caught his eye. There was nothing overtly remarkable about it. Just another wheat penny. But Curtis had developed an instinct for irregularities. Something about the shape of the date seemed off, and the L in Liberty looked thinner than it should. He slipped the coin into his pocket, not expecting much, and went home to inspect it under his magnifying glass. It took only a few minutes before his heart began to race. The date on the coin wasn't just off-center, it was doubled. Not blurred or stretched like post-mint damage, but cleanly doubled, with 2 distinct impressions of the 1941, the V4 in particular looking like it had a shadow cast slightly southeast of the primary digit. His eyes moved to Lincoln's profile, and there it was again, a subtle but distinct doubling along the nose, lips, and bow tie. The reverse was less dramatic, but there was an unusual thickness to the D and S in E pluribus unum, and the rim showed slight signs of dye erosion. But it wasn't damage from use, this was something that had happened in the minting process itself. Curtis consulted his modest library of coin references, but the error he held didn't appear in any known registry. It wasn't long before he submitted the coin to NGC for evaluation. Weeks passed in silence. When the coin returned, it came in a holder bearing the words, 1941 Lincoln cent, double die obverse, MS62, unlisted variety. Along with the designation came a note, unrecognized double die. Strong doubling on date and obverse profile. Reverse slightly misaligned. That confirmation sent a ripple through Curtis's small world. He shared the find on a coin forum, attaching clear images and his thoughts. The community's reaction was mixed. Some dismissed it as minor hub doubling. Others, particularly experienced collectors, recognized something rarer, a potential new variety that had never been catalogued. The doubling was sharp enough, consistent enough, that it couldn't be brushed aside as mechanical doubling or strike blur. More eyes began to look for a match. In the following year, only 3 other coins surfaced with similar traits. Each was a 1941 penny from the Philadelphia Mint, and each showed varying degrees of doubling in the same areas, on the date, in Lincoln's jawline, and on portions of the motto. Unlike many double dies that only affected isolated characters or design elements, this one extended across multiple areas, a sign that it may have been the result of a die that had been improperly hubbed early in its life. Curtis's coin, however, remained the clearest and best preserved example. He refused early offers from collectors and dealers, some of whom offered 4 figures, hoping to acquire the piece quietly. But Curtis wasn't driven by profit. He began to document every detail of the coin, comparing it to standard 1941 issues, even tracing back mint production records from that year to find any signs of equipment malfunction or maintenance delays. He found nothing official. It was as though the error had slipped through a momentary crack in a machine's rhythm and disappeared into circulation before anyone noticed. By 2010, the coin began to gain traction in modern numismatic circles. A small but growing interest developed among wheat penny specialists, especially those who hunted lesser-known double dies. The Curtis variety, as it became informally known, started appearing in online guides as a minor but notable anomaly. That year, a VF-35 example sold for $4,800 at a regional auction. 3 years later, another, graded XF-45, went for just over $9,000. The turning point came in 2017 when a collector from California discovered a Curtis-type 1941 penny with an even more dramatic doubling pattern. On his coin, the before in the date showed a complete split in the vertical bar, and Lincoln's bow tie appeared doubled with visible separation in the lines. This find reinvigorated interest in the variety, and Curtis's original coin was suddenly viewed as the standard against which others were measured. Speculation grew that this double die may have originated from a misalignment during the hubbing process involving a worn master die, or potentially during a rush to meet wartime production quotas. Though the U.S. didn't officially enter World War II until December of 1941, the mint had already begun ramping up coin production that year in anticipation of economic shifts. It wasn't far-fetched to believe that quality control may have suffered during that period. Adding to the mystery, a researcher found that several minor mechanical problems had been logged in Philadelphia mint reports during early 1941. Most were routine and never deemed significant. But Curtis and others believed that one such moment, however small, might have been responsible for the unusual doubling that gave birth to his pennies legend. By 2021, only a handful of these coins were known, and Curtis's original specimen remained the sharpest and highest graded example. Auction houses began calling, and private collectors raised their offers. One wealthy investor known for targeting obscure coin errors placed a bid of $58,000. Curtis refused once more. He still carried the coin in its slab, stored in a small fireproof box, wrapped in cloth, as if protecting something sacred. Today, the Curtis variety of the 1941 wheat penny is a coveted prize for dedicated collectors of Lincoln cents and error coins. Not officially listed in all price guides, its reputation travels quietly among those who value rarity hidden in plain sight. While most 1941 pennies are worth only a few cents above face value, the known Curtis specimens command intense attention whenever they surface. The most pristine of these, especially those showing full separation in the date and facial features, have now reached an estimated market value between $70,000 and $165,000, depending on condition and clarity. It's a stunning leap for a coin once tossed casually into change, its error sleeping unnoticed through generations. And for collectors like Curtis, it proves that the most remarkable treasures are not always made of gold or silver, but sometimes of copper and patience, waiting for the right eyes to find them. In 1946, America was in transition. The war was over, soldiers were coming home, and factories once used for munitions were shifting back to peacetime production. There was optimism in the air, but also uncertainty. Families were rebuilding, and communities were reshaping themselves after years of sacrifice. At the United States Mint, production continued without pause. The presses ran day and night, churning out the currency that would support a recovering economy. Among the most heavily produced coins that year was the Lincoln wheat penny. With its long-standing design and simple copper composition, it was a coin that no one gave a second thought to. Yet, in the middle of that post-war efficiency, something unexpected slipped into circulation. The 1946 Lincoln cent was struck at 3 mints, Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. Tens of millions of these pennies were made, stamped, bagged, and sent into circulation without delay. Quality control at the time was solid, but even the best systems falter under pressure. There were moments in 1946 when the demand for coinage far outpaced the ability of the mints to slow down and correct small problems. And that's when a rare error emerged, one that would remain hidden in plain sight for decades. It wouldn't be until the late 1990s that a curious anomaly began to attract quiet attention from collectors. A numismatist in North Carolina named Evelyn, who had been collecting since childhood, was going through her father's old coin folders after his passing. It was a sentimental task. She wasn't looking for treasure, only memories. One folder was filled with wheat pennies, sorted by year. She smiled as she saw the familiar rows: 1941, 1942, 1943 steel, 1944, 1945. But when she came to the 1946 slot, her eyes narrowed. The coin had a soft luster, unusual for a circulated penny, but it wasn't that which caught her attention. Under a small magnifier, she spotted something strange. The word Liberty looked doubled, particularly the B and E. It was subtle, but clear. She turned the coin under a light. Lincoln's eye appeared slightly distorted, and the shape of the bow tie on his collar showed faint but noticeable doubling. It was the kind of detail that most people would never notice, but Evelyn had trained herself to see the smallest imperfections. She flipped it over. The wheat stalks looked normal at first, but the spacing in the legend, 1 cent, seemed inconsistent. The E in cent appeared thicker on one side. It wasn't a dramatic error, no clipped planchet, no off-center strike, but it was just strange enough to warrant a second opinion. She set the coin aside and began researching. What she found was curious. There were virtually no official mentions of a known double die for the 1946 cent. A few forums discussed minor anomalies, but no confirmed classification existed in any mainstream error guide. Still, she submitted the coin to PCGS. When it returned, the label was short and puzzling: 1946 Lincoln cent, double die obverse, MS61, variety unknown. The grader included a note describing strong doubling in Liberty and slight doubling in Lincoln's profile. Evelyn knew then that she had found something special, something not yet acknowledged by the broader community. Word spread slowly. At first, it was just a footnote on coin forums, then a topic of interest in a few newsletters. Error specialists took notice, some comparing Evelyn's coin to minor 1945 varieties to see if the die had been reused or repolished. No direct match was found. Her coin, it seemed, had come from a short-lived die pair that had escaped full documentation. In 2002, a dealer in Missouri confirmed a second example. It was more worn, graded -50 Australian dollars, but displayed the same doubling in the obverse lettering and Lincoln's eye. A third surfaced 2 years later in New Mexico, though this one had been cleaned, reducing its value. By 2005, the numismatic community had begun to refer to it casually as the 1946 double die variety, though no official nickname was ever adopted. The story took a strange turn in 2010 when a collector at a Chicago coin show presented a 1946 cent with unusual coloration. It had a slightly yellowish hue, more golden than copper. Tests later revealed it had been struck on a brass planchet, likely left over from wartime production of shell casings. Somehow, in the rush of early 1946, a few non-standard planchets had made their way into the presses. This added another layer to the growing legend of the 1946 cent, a double die struck on leftover brass stock, a collision of wartime remnants and peacetime minting. It wasn't long before auction houses took notice. A well-preserved 1946 double die example, verified by 3 grading services, appeared at a New York auction in 2015. It sold for $34,200, shattering expectations. 2 years later, another, with stronger doubling and full red-brown color, went for $48,600. Each sale added weight to the error's rarity. Unlike other varieties that were catalogued and traced over hundreds or thousands of examples, the 1946 double die remained elusive. Fewer than a dozen confirmed examples exist, and each carried its own unique fingerprint of flaws. Evelyn's original coin, now regraded as MS63, remained in her personal collection. She received offers year after year, the highest of which reached $80,000, but she never sold. For her, the coin wasn't just rare, it was a connection to her father, a symbol of inheritance and curiosity, found not in a bank vault but in an old cardboard folder in a quiet home. Today, the 1946 wheat penny error has become a grail of sorts for error collectors. It lacks the fame of the 1955 double die or the drama of the 1943 copper, but it holds a unique position among post-war coins, quiet, understated, but undeniably significant. It reflects a moment in history when the machinery of war gave way to the rhythm of peace, and in that moment, something imperfect slipped through and became immortal. As the market for rare Lincoln cents continues to grow, especially among those who seek lesser-known varieties, the value of the 1946 double die has climbed steadily. Depending on its condition, color, and clarity of doubling, the coin is now valued between $62,000 and $148,000. It's a remarkable figure for a coin once worth only a single cent, now worth enough to buy a house, all because someone took the time to look just a little closer. In 1950, the United States was embracing a post-war boom, a period defined by optimism, industrial growth, and a newfound global role in leadership. The shadows of World War II were beginning to recede, but their echoes still lingered in factories, families, and government institutions. Coin production, which had been ramped up during the war and adapted for metal shortages, had returned to normal, but not without its own residual quirks. That year, the U.S. Mint continued producing the Lincoln Wheat Penny, a design that had become deeply familiar to Americans since its debut in 1909. It was a coin meant for function, not fame. But among the millions produced, one batch emerged carrying something it wasn't supposed to, a small, barely noticeable flaw that would take decades to fully understand. The Lincoln cent of 1950 was struck in large numbers at 3 mint locations: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. The Philadelphia Mint, as always, produced the highest volume. These coins were business as usual, poured into circulation and quickly forgotten. No one expected anything unusual from the batch, until a collector stumbled upon something that defied the coin's otherwise mundane reputation. It happened in the early 1980s, when a man named Russell, a former bank employee and lifelong coin enthusiast from Illinois, decided to go through jars of old pennies he'd stored in his garage. He wasn't looking for anything specific, just enjoying the slow rhythm of inspection, one coin at a time. He had always favored wheat pennies, especially those from the 1940s and early 50s, knowing they could sometimes hide overlooked gems. One coin, dated 1950, seemed unremarkable at first glance, but a second look raised his curiosity. The 0 in the date looked thicker than the other digits. Not bloated or worn, just different. He examined the coin under magnification and felt a rush of adrenaline. The 1950 on the obverse showed subtle but clear signs of doubling. Each number had a ghost-like impression beside it, especially the 5 and 0. The word Liberty showed similar irregularities. Lincoln's eye appeared slightly split, as though stamped twice in rapid succession. It wasn't post-mint damage. The doubling had depth, structure, something that only occurred during the minting process itself. The reverse of the coin seemed relatively normal, though some letters in United States of America looked slightly thicker than usual, hinting at light die fatigue. Russell didn't act immediately. He held on to the coin, unsure if it was worth much. But after comparing it with hundreds of other 1950 pennies, he found nothing else like it. That was when he decided to send it to Annax, one of the few coin grading services at the time that openly evaluated errors. The coin came back certified as a 1950 Lincoln cent, double die obverse, MS-60. There were no public records of this error. It had never been listed in major guides, and Russell realized he had stumbled upon something largely undocumented. He began corresponding with other collectors and dealers, slowly building interest in the anomaly. At first, most were skeptical. Double dies were not unheard of, but the 1950 cent had no confirmed major varieties. That changed when 2 other examples surfaced through private collectors, both displaying similar doubling, though not quite as strong. A pattern was beginning to emerge. All the known examples originated from Philadelphia. All had similar traits in the obverse doubling, and all showed minor anomalies in Lincoln's profile, particularly the lips and jawline. The theory among specialists was that the doubling had occurred during the hubbing of a single working die. Whether due to misalignment or slippage during the creation of the die, the doubling was pressed into the surface at the earliest stage of production, meaning every coin struck from it would carry the flaw. But it appeared that this flawed die was only used for a short period before being replaced. That made the number of coins bearing the doubling extremely limited. By the late 1990s, references to the 1950 double die began appearing in specialized error coin publications. It remained obscure but respected, known among dedicated Lincoln cent collectors as a sleeper variety, one of those coins that might sit unnoticed in a coin jar or folder for decades before someone took a closer look. Then, in 2008, a coin graded MS-63 red with exceptionally strong doubling appeared at a Florida auction. The bidding was cautious at first, but after the authenticity was verified by PCGS, interest exploded. The coin sold for $27,400, a jaw-dropping result for a date no one had paid much attention to for decades. After that sale, more collectors began hunting for the 1950 double die. A handful of additional specimens surfaced over the following years, but they were few and far between. Some were found in circulated condition, others in old Whitman folders where they'd been stored since the 1950s. One particularly sharp example came out of a Pennsylvania estate sale, nestled in a child's long-forgotten coin collection. The more coins that were discovered, the more patterns became apparent. The strongest doubling occurred on early die state examples, coins that were struck before the die wore down and softened the doubling details. These early strikes became the most sought after, and the highest priced. What set the 1950 error apart was not just the rarity, but the subtlety. It wasn't as blatant as the famous 1955 double die, but it offered a level of detail that demanded close inspection. It rewarded patience, rewarded the collector's eye. Unlike flashy errors that could be spotted instantly, the 1950 double die was a whisper, not a shout, a quiet anomaly hiding in the folds of history. A surprising twist came in 2017, when a Canadian collector submitted a coin to NGC that, at first glance, seemed like an ordinary 1950 wheat penny. But closer inspection revealed something new, a double die reverse, with strong evidence of doubling in the words E pluribus unum and the lower rim. This was the first known 1950 penny to feature confirmed doubling on both obverse and reverse, suggesting that more than one error die may have been active during that year's production. It reignited interest, and sparked a flurry of submissions from collectors who had held on to their 1950 cents for decades, suddenly seeing them in a new light. Though only a small number of genuine 1950 double die specimens exist, their value has increased steadily. The coin has become a fixture at specialty auctions, and its presence in top-tier collections is now a point of pride. Collectors covet early die state examples, especially those graded MS-63 or higher with clear red color. Prices have climbed as competition has grown fiercer, with some collectors traveling across states just to view a rumored specimen in person. Today, the rare 1950 double die wheat penny stands as a powerful reminder that numismatic treasure doesn't always shout from the rooftops. Sometimes, it waits quietly for the right eyes to find it. With only a handful of confirmed examples in mint state condition, its market value has soared. Depending on the strength of the doubling, condition, and coloration, the value of the coin now ranges from $48,000 to $124,000. And it continues to rise, quietly rewriting its place in numismatic history one discovery at a time. In 1957, America was balancing on the edge of transformation. The post-war boom was in full swing, the suburbs were expanding, and televisions were flickering in millions of living rooms. The Cold War brewed quietly beneath the surface, but everyday life carried a rhythm of normalcy. At the United States Mint, that normalcy was reflected in production. The Lincoln wheat penny, still bearing its classic reverse design of two wheat stalks, continued to be pressed in enormous quantities. That year, the Philadelphia and Denver mints produced over 1 billion Lincoln cents combined. To the naked eye, there was nothing extraordinary about the 1957 wheat penny. It was a simple copper coin, produced in abundance and meant to pass quickly from hand to hand. Yet within that sea of standard production, a subtle mistake was struck, an error that would take decades to surface and even longer to be fully understood. No one at the time could have imagined that any 1957 penny would eventually command the kind of attention typically reserved for earlier rarities. The coin's design was familiar, even comforting. Abraham Lincoln's profile faced right, dignified and solemn. The word liberty stood tall to his left, and the date, 1957, sat neatly to his right. There was no mint mark on the Philadelphia issues, no initial hint of rarity. But in a small fraction of coins, something was different. A misstep had occurred, not dramatic, not immediately obvious, but undeniably significant. In the early 1990s, a small-town collector named Harold, who'd been hoarding wheat pennies since his teenage years, found himself digging through old jars one cold afternoon. He wasn't expecting a windfall, he simply loved the hunt. As he sorted through the coins by date and mint mark, his attention was caught by a particularly well-preserved 1957 penny. The color was warm and bright, suggesting it hadn't been in circulation long. But it was the details on the obverse that made him pause. Under his loupe, he noticed a peculiar thickness in the lettering. The Liberty seemed to have shadows, traces of a second impression, slightly shifted. He tilted the coin in the light. Lincoln's eye appeared bulbous, more pronounced than it should. The 7 in the date had a doubled edge, almost like a reflection stamped into metal. It wasn't the kind of damage caused by wear. Harold had seen post-mint damage before. This was different. It had precision. He consulted reference books, but none mentioned a double die for 1957. Most collectors at the time focused on earlier varieties, the 1917, the famous 1955, or even the minor double dies of the early 1940s. Still, Harold submitted the coin to a grading service. When it returned, the label confirmed his suspicion: 1957 Lincoln cent, double die obverse, 58 Australian dollars. It was the first confirmation of its kind. At first, few paid attention. The coin didn't have the bold doubling of the 1955 issue, nor the dramatic story of the 1943 bronze cents. But slowly, word began to spread among error coin collectors. A few more examples turned up, always from old penny rolls or collections that had remained untouched for decades. The doubling was subtle, but consistent, thickening in the date, separation in the letters of Liberty, and slight distortion in Lincoln's lower jaw and collar. By the early 2000s, specialists had identified two primary varieties of the 1957 double die. One featured strong doubling across the date and letters, particularly in early die state coins. The other, more elusive variety showed doubling on both the obverse and reverse, something almost unheard of for this date. In those rare cases, the wheat stalks on the reverse appeared slightly misaligned, and the letters in 1 cent had shadow-like edges. These dual-sided errors were considered among the finest finds of the decade. In 2007, a well-known numismatist from California unveiled a pristine example of the obverse/reverse double die, graded MS64 red by PCGS. The coin caused a sensation when it was displayed at the Long Beach Coin Expo. Collectors lined up to view it under magnification. The doubling was elegant and undeniable. Offers came in before the coin was even listed for sale. It eventually sold privately for a sum rumored to exceed $70,000. Interest in the 1957 error spiked. More collectors began combing through their wheat penny hoards, hoping to find one of the elusive varieties. Dealers who once passed over 1957 cents began taking a second look. Though billions were made, only a small sliver bore the doubling, and fewer still survived in high grade. It became a test of patience and persistence, an error that rewarded attention to the smallest details. Adding to the intrigue was a twist uncovered in 2015. A researcher at a Midwestern coin club, while analyzing toning patterns on various Lincoln cents, identified a strange discoloration in some 1957 errors. Several examples exhibited a mild golden hue, different from typical copper or brown tones. Metallurgical testing revealed a slightly higher zinc content in those coins, suggesting that a batch of planchets may have been improperly alloyed. While not enough to qualify as off-metal strikes, these anomalies added another layer of interest for collectors. Some began referring to them informally as ghost brass varieties. Though no official designation exists, the 1957 double die error has, over time, evolved from an obscure curiosity into a coveted piece of mid-century minting history. Its appeal lies not only in rarity but in subtlety. It doesn't demand attention with a glaring mistake, it rewards it with a whisper, a soft distortion in metal that tells a quiet story of human oversight and mechanical flaw. It bridges the gap between mass production and individual discovery, a reminder that even among billions, uniqueness can survive. As more of these coins have come to light, most often in mid-grade or circulated condition, the competition for higher-grade examples has intensified. Collectors prize coins with full red luster and crisp doubling, and those with dual-sided anomalies fetch even more. Auction results continue to surprise. One particularly sharp MS-65 red specimen sold in 2021 for nearly $92,000, setting a new benchmark for the variety. Today, the value of the 1957 wheat penny with the double die era ranges between $45,000 and $116,000, depending on grade, color, and strike clarity. It stands as a shining example of how something so small, just a sliver of copper, can carry decades of history, mystery, and growing worth in the palm of a collector's hand.